check. Yep, looking good. Good morning and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thanks for joining me today. I'm glad to already see Jerry and Douglas and Lucille on. It's been a bit crazy this morning. I had a cat that decided at the last second she had to come inside and make sure that everything was okay. Check out the keyboard, the computer, the mouse, sit on my shoulders for a bit, then run off when I wouldn't let her drink water out of my hand. So it's been a bit of a busy morning, but not near as busy as it's been for the last couple of days over in Ukraine. So let's go ahead and jump straight into things here and get things going here. We've got well, I'm going to start off with Belgorod first. There was an apartment building that was struck or exploded. I'm trying to use my words very carefully on this one. Over the weekend here, there were many people trapped into the rubble, etc., like that. You can see here the video of some of the collapse going on as part of this situation. There's a lot to be said about it. The Russians obviously went off with already, it was the Ukrainians, it was a missile strike. They even identified the exact missile they said was the culprit. They said they shot it down and the debris hit the building, and then other times they said no, it was a direct strike by the Ukrainians. There's various problems with that story as it is. They state that this, again, was hit by a shell or a missile. Belgorod is not within regular shelling range as far as with artillery. It is certainly within range of some of the longer range missile artillery that are missile systems that Ukraine could use, easily within range of some of them. But there's a few factors to discuss. Of course, as I said, they definitely have been blaming Ukraine for it without any evidence. I mean, just straight up no evidence on this. And we've got several I've got several people who talk about this blast here as we go on. Here's some of the aftermath footage here. You can see that some of the damage of it from the actual attack on Belgorod. This is not the building itself. There were several impacts in Belgorod as of yesterday. This is yesterday's footage. So expect to see a whole bunch of that as we go forward. They do claim that the number's been updated since then. I believe it's 11 now. People died when the entrance of this building collapsed in Belgorod. They show some of the air defense systems active in the city. But from everything I've been able to tell, the air raid alarm did not sound before this building was supposedly struck. And in fact, it wasn't until after that they started seeing air defense systems operating. Which leaves a few things to be concerned about. Here is a video of the actual collapse itself. We'll be talking about this many times in the next little bit here. If you watch carefully, you'll see that the explosion happens exactly at 11:20. Oh, I got to refresh here. 11:21 and 0 seconds. So, very precise timing. I mean, there's always coincidences, but right at that time is when that strike hits. There are multiple video angles of this explosion and a lot of conversation going on around it. Here's the a closer view of the rescuers at work. You can barely see at the top here that some of the top floor or roof of the building was still there over this area where the rescuers were working. Not a lot, but just a small chunk. In unrelated news, and I'll tell you, okay, sort of related news, this is also at Belgorod. A Fab 500 bomb was dropped on a random parking lot by Russian forces. This is confirmed to be a Russian unintended release of equipment. And they are going to have to evacuate the area around this bomb before they either detonate it or defuse it. As of, let's see, late last night, they did find the search and rescue portions were complete. 15 people were found dead at the side of the apartment building. Then, of course, the Ministry of Defense, I mentioned that was mentioned a Tochka U missile here. The high explosive warhead only carries about 162 kilos of explosives and a bunch of submunitions. Basically think of it as a cluster munition. They would scatter over the entire area. And as Crimean Wind states, all the photos and the videos from the scene of the tragedy, there's no traces of impacts from these other destructive elements. Now, they do acknowledge that there could be the possibility that all of these explosive elements were inside the house and all buried under the rubble, but there's explosions only out of one side, and they would expect at least some small amount of the fragments or submunitions to fly out in this direction. There's other reasons why this is not a likely thing to have happened. In particular, that, and this kind of some of this is a little bit disorganized here. In order for it to hit the missile to hit from the back side of the building, it would have come from the northeast. This is kind of a rotated picture here, which would mean, northwest, which would put it from Russian territory. In order to hit from the other side, it would be from the east. Hold on, let me rotate that. Yeah, no, that's right. Northeast. There we go. And the south from the southwest, it wouldn't have been really possible for Ukraine to have made that strike either from the angle and the low attack angle as well. Either way, no matter how you rotate this, in fact, I'll see if I can get a better view of it right here, because I think this is rotated off of north. I've got something better on this. Not handy. Okay. And I don't have the actual maps available right now. So this building here would have been impacting somewhere in this area. And from one direction, it couldn't have come from Ukraine. From the other one, it's blocked by other buildings. It's just silly, is what it is. So where's that good video of the explosion? Okay, here's Tindar's analysis. There we go. You can just barely see it. They're repeating this explosion in this video, and you can just see it kind of blows out from the bottom of the building, almost like a detonation of an explosive charge at the bottom. Hi, Ozzy. Glad to have you here. Also, the consequences look almost exactly like the explosion of a gas pipeline that happened under a similar building. Let me see if I've got that picture handy. Things have gotten there was a lot of stuff I was researching when I was doing this. Yeah, here we go. Here's the consequences of an explosion in a residential building in Magnitogorsk in December 31st, 2018. And this is the explosion of a residential building in Belgorod on May 12th. Look almost identical in the effects that you might see. So we're looking at a lot of question marks, and that's the real issue there. Now, the analysis by Tindar is a bit longer here. They do show that the explosion pattern indicates an explosion from inside the building. There's no signs of missiles coming down, and the smoke and debris is going sideways, not up. This is very similar, says Tindar, to the 1999 Moscow high-rise building bombings, which were blown up by the Russian FSB to justify the war in Chechnya. Now, they do mention the gas explosion. The Russian infrastructure is crumbling left and right. That's a possibility. It could be a negligent or accidental discharge. Then there's they do acknowledge the potential that the missile may have come in from the back side of the building. Would have been, okay, here we go. The missile would have come from the northeastern direction, and typically a Fab 250 or 500 may have had enough explosive yield to cause that destruction. The other thing that they cannot absolutely rule, they rule it out. I'm going to put it that way. They rule out that a missile coming from the southwest can be ruled out, and therefore it couldn't have come from Ukraine. The whole of the building, especially at ground level, is quite wide, indicating that the explosion occurred within that circle. All windows on that side being destroyed confirmed that detonation. Let me get this pulled up here. All windows on that side being destroyed confirmed that the detonation occurred on the northeastern side. The windows on the southwestern side are widely intact. It gives the theory that a Russian glide bomb hit the building from the northeast and detonated at the lower level, more weight. The Belgorod region was several times hit by Russian glide bombs, as shown in this link below. The CCTV footage captured from the situation from the other southwestern side recorded only the exiting blast wave. It also explained why this looked like an explosion from the inside of the building. So, again, the explosion from one side, you don't see any missiles incoming on either one. The explosion looks like it came from the northeast side, which had been from the Russian side, not from the southwest side. It's just, and Russia's going to try and use this, is what they're going to do. They're going to try and use this in some way to blame Ukraine for it, regardless of whether Ukraine was involved. And that's the overall situation on this apartment building in Belgorod. In other news in Belgorod, there was an oil depot near Stary Oskol that was attacked by drones, and the electrical substation next to it, which was also damaged heavily. So clearly, the question is going to be, what is Russian air defense doing? Let's go ahead and move on to Kharkiv here Kharkiv for a little bit. In fact, for a long bit. I've got a huge number of tabs open on this, and I know they're not perfectly organized, so we're going to be kind of touching on things, and I might be popping back and forth, just FYI. The situation in Kharkiv, just as an overall summary, is very much a situation in flux. The Ukrainians claim that they have the situation under control, but it is a very difficult situation. There have been some reports that expected defenses in some of the areas did not exist or were poorly placed, and therefore the Russians were able to just walk through the initial parts of the defensive fortifications, like as in the minefields and things like that, because they were not there. On the other hand, I also saw some mine roller equipped Russian tanks that were taken out. So there's a possibility that there's a lot of miscommunication going on around this situation in Kharkiv. The Russians have continued to expand their assault into this area, but their rate is slowing down, and they've been held back at places like Volchansk and other locations. But the villages and towns that are closest to the lines are falling relatively quickly. Volchansk itself has combat happening on the edges of town. The Russians have not been able to penetrate farther in. However, people are evacuating en masse, and so we're going to be going through a lot of this thing. Overall, the Institute for the Study of War's assessment basically has remained consistent throughout, with saying that the Russian forces are conducting relatively limited offensive operations along the Russian-Ukrainian border in the northern Kharkiv Oblast and continue to make tactically significant gains in likely less defended areas. The reported sizes of the Russian elements committed to these limited operations and of the Russian forces grouping deployed along the border in northeastern Ukraine indicate the Russian forces are not pursuing a large-scale operation to envelop, encircle, or seize Kharkiv city at this time. And overall, that seems to match the assessment. I think they would be delighted if they could. I don't see them having enough forces and equipment to do so successfully, at least from all the sources I'm reading. Of course, that does depend on Ukraine being able to counter those forces. That may require them to move resources from other parts of the front, and that's a situation that's concerning. Francis Farrell here has reporting on civilians fleeing from Volchansk under Russian bombardment, and it looks like Russia's real goal here is not to spend time trying to capture Volchansk, but to literally render it incapable of supporting life by bombing everything in sight and flattening the entire existence of it. This is not a war of capture. They're not trying to capture people or equipment or intact cities. This is a war of absolute destruction, or total war, as you might call it, where everything in their path is to be laid waste and anything they capture. In fact, there's been reports that some of the commanders of Russian forces are no longer accepting prisoners of war. They're just shooting them outright. I have those reports are unconfirmed at this time, but we've seen several videos of Ukrainian prisoners of war being shot by the Russian forces. So there's possibility that that may be an accurate statement. The situation is that they intend to just flatten everything in between them and where they want to go. They may be trying to get enough of a buffer zone, as they like to call it, to where they can actually use regular tube artillery and mortars and try and actually shell, not mortars is the wrong word, but regular tube artillery in order to be able to shell Kharkiv city itself and start bringing it into this same full destruction. President Zelensky expressed the situation as being difficult as the Russian troops advance. He says that they are trying to gain a foothold in some villages in Kharkiv, and heavy fighting is ongoing in the region. And he phrased it as extremely difficult in the outskirts of Volchansk. Pause on this one. I'm just going to go ahead and just drop the link into the comments here for this one. The video is pretty good. It's for the Kyiv Independent's been doing really good work lately, and I do appreciate their journalistic excellence in this situation. Now, the number of, this is from the 11th, so this is 2 days old, 1,700 civilians evacuated from Kharkiv Oblast over the previous day, with 1,775 total being evacuated from their homes amid these renewed attacks. These evacuations have continued. There's about 500 people remaining in the city of Volchansk, close to the Russian border. This is probably a mix of people who are unable to effectively evacuate and people who are basically just sitting there anyway, just going to sit there and see what happens. So you can see here we've got somebody being evacuated that requires a wheelchair. Some of these people are going to be challenging to evacuate. Others just may not want to leave. Now, this is older information here talking about the evacuations. The UK's from the UK, David Cameron states the situation in Kharkiv is extremely dangerous and called on allies to Ukraine to do everything they can to help the Ukrainians, adding that there was a recent £3 billion yearly package to Ukraine, and adding that Westminster is encouraging others to do the same. Ukraine's military, though, has said that Moscow's troops had been contained in the gray zone border villages on May 11th. And Russia, the other reports I've been seeing is that Russia's managed to capture a few other small villages as they've been going. Still, as of yesterday, the General Syrskyi has stated that they have halted Russia's primary advance, with the situation in several sectors changing rapidly. This is a dynamic situation. This is not something where you can just sit down and say, okay, it's all solved as of right now. It's not. There's going to be bits of Russian assaults through different areas. They're going to be countered by Ukrainians. There's going to be various things going on, and we're going to try and keep up with all of it. Still, even in Sumy, the Russians have not let up. They're still attacking various communities on the next oblast over, and there could be further happening in that area because they have been building up some troops outside of Sumy. Here's video over from Volchansk here, or Volchansk. You can see some of the people being evacuated from the area in whatever vehicles they can. This looks like a fire truck, if you ask me. Yeah, there we go, fire truck. The destruction is not total, but it is extensive. And so people are being evacuated while they're still able to evacuate. With the Russians right there, it's always a concern. Further updates on Volchansk. You can see here the law enforcement is still working in the area as best they can, helping evacuate people and assisting with emergency situations. Now, the group that's crossed into Kharkiv is using this cross here. They call it the cross of hydrocephalus, but it's rotated about 45 degrees. Now, I believe that is the symbol. They say it right here. It's a symbol of self-destruction and voluntary degradation. So make of that what you will. Video basically of some of the situation there on the outskirts of the city. This is in apparently a forested area nearby. This is going to be ongoing combat through the entire area. Don't expect anything to change for a few days as far as the overall news that's coming out of there. There was this exchange on some of the audio messages in the command chat of the Ukrainian 57th Motorized Brigade in Vovchansk. And I'll try my best to read this to you here. This is the type of situation they're in. This is the dire, desperate combat. This reminds me, at least in concept, of the initial stages of the Battle of the Bulge, where unprepared, usually new units of the U.S. military were assaulted by German forces. Out of the blue, they weren't expecting it. They weren't prepared for it. This was a relatively quiet area. The front there at the time, they were not prepared for the German assault at that time in the Battle of the Bulge, and many were captured and many were killed, and yet there was still some that made the stand. The weather situation was awful. Getting resupply and equipment into the area was near impossible, but they stood and they held. So let's read this. Lieutenant Colonel, please let us sleep. We have been working nonstop for 2 days. Commander, the whole country is counting on us. We will sleep in the next world, but now we have to save this world. We have no choice. We took an oath. Die or kill. To a certain extent, and the analogs are not exact, but this is for these units in Kharkiv. This is their Battle of the Bulge. Some of their defenses that were thought to be fully prepared turned out to be inadequate. This part of the front was relatively calm for some time, even though they were anticipating this happening. And as you'll see later, they knew the date and the time. Things did not exactly go perfectly for them over in the Ukrainians at all. And this is the challenge they are facing at this point. However, there is some good news. There are still well-prepared defensive lines in Kharkiv that they're now employing to good effect. As it says here, concrete shelters are connected with each other by a network of trenches. It's possible to conduct an almost circular defense. Ukrainian soldiers say that these positions are better fortified than the ones near Bakhmut were some time ago. Defense lines are well made, and the Russians won't be able to get through them. Now, there's some confidence in that. These are not exactly are a little bit behind where the Russians have assaulted so far. They do again say that the breakthrough attempts have been stopped. Sersky again said, our reconnaissance artillery units and units of unmanned systems are at work. We know the enemy's plans and react flexibly to all their actions. To strengthen the defense, all defense efforts are being made. Decisions, including staff ones. This is ongoing and complicated combat. This is a tough situation. The video here is an elderly lady reciting a poem by a Ukrainian poet as she is evacuated. This report, as of from late yesterday, was 4,500 people had been evacuated from the Kharkiv region. Another video from Vovchansk, to which the Russian army is approaching. A lot of people are fleeing, and the city is under constant shelling. This journalist says that many of them have been under Russian occupation before and don't want to go through it again. As I've said before, it's very poorly reviewed to be under Russian occupation. Definitely 0 stars. The Russian Volunteer Corps is actively involved in the defense of Volchansk in the Kharkiv border area. They use this BTR-82 to good effect, firing at Russian units near the Volchansk meat processing plant. The Russians have minimal amounts of armored vehicles in this assault. They've had several tanks taken out. They've had quite a few armored personnel carriers taken out. Ukraine has got, as far as vehicles go, is I think better equipped than Russia is in this area at this point in time. Still a very challenging situation, and I believe that once again the Ukrainian military is likely outnumbered as this assault is going on. With the issues with the defense of Kharkiv, the commander of the operational grouping of troops in this area was replaced. Brigadier General Mikhailo Drapati was appointed instead of Yuri Galushkin. The interesting part is Drapati was a deputy chief of the general staff and used to command the operational grouping in Kherson. That would mean it was probably involved in a lot of the liberation of the northern part of the Kherson region. So something positive there, and it could be that this could be the right man at the right time to make sure that things don't get worse in Kharkiv. Null Reports gives their map updates here. The Russians have potentially taken control of 3 more villages, Morovets, Olinkove, and Zelene, with the fighting occurring on the outskirts of Volchansk. This is as of this morning, so this is literally the latest information available as far as what the Russians have been able to take and where they are being held back at. This is, like I said, a dynamic situation and rough overall. What happened to my maps? My maps went away. I hit the wrong. There we go. Boop, there we go. No, hey, get back here. Apparently the other map I'm not able to get right now. It's here somewhere. Let me scroll down. There it is. Bingo. And here's the other side. There's 2 major portions that the Russians have assaulted into. The section between them is difficult terrain for assaulting through, and therefore they're going for the areas that are a little more robust for as far as their ability to get troops and equipment through. This is the situation near Volchansk. We've already mentioned several times. The Russians are on the outskirts of the town, but the situation is pretty difficult. A local policeman in charge of the evacuation says that Volchansk is being destroyed by the Russians and that they are trying to get all the local population out. A summary of the situation here, and now I'm going to be getting into some things that fall into well-informed speculation. And therefore, I'm going to be doing some opinions on the Kharkiv situation as well in the middle of this, at least as far as my best understanding of the situation is at this point in time. The situation of Volchansk is dire and complex, according to Null Reports. Despite successful efforts by the 57th Brigade to halt the advance of Storm Z with reconnaissance and artillery strikes, Russia has brought in reinforcements, leading to street fighting and the city being, quote, surrounded. For 2 years, concrete fortifications of -3 floors were supposed to stand on the Ukrainian border, and they were not even mines. We come to the opinion that this is either a crazy theft or deliberate sabotage. That's one officer's opinion. I've got others we're going to be going through here. Theft or sabotage, always a possibility. It could also be that the Russians had been preparing this area for a while and had cleared some specific lanes they knew were good and were able to get through. A lot of possibilities. However, Yuri Butasov's assessment of the situation in the Kharkiv Oblast, as Dmitry at War Translated says that this is rather optimistic. He says Russian advances have slowed now that they are running into real defensive positions, and the Russian losses are increasing. He adds that some of the existing fortifications were built in the wrong locations, and the situation overall is improving. There are reports here, and again, a lot of this is getting into relatively informed speculation territory. So I don't have good confirmation, as in I didn't see these things happen, and I've not seen the good information that says for sure. There are reports that some of the Ukrainian defense forces had abandoned their positions, which allowed the Russians to capture a few settlements. My opinion on this speculation is that the good defensive lines were a little bit farther back. They were not intended to be right on the border with Russia, and therefore some of these initial villages were going to fall into Russian hands in the first few moments. Was there a unit or units that fell back or abandoned position? Excuse me, fell back or abandoned positions? Potentially. They state that the 57th Motorized 92nd Assault Brigade filled the situation and stabilized it. Again, same thing, stating that there was no first lines of defense without any minefields and just walked across unopposed. So we're seeing a couple of different narratives emerge from the Ukrainian side. One of them is that the initial fortifications failed entirely or were abandoned, or they were not appropriately staffed and equipped. Others are saying this is what we expected. We had prepared for this. We have got good fallback lines, and the real line of defense that we're really going to be using is here instead. Some of the truth probably lies somewhere between the two. Budanov stated that the military intelligence said they were aware of the timing of the Russian ground offensive in Kharkiv in advance and, quote, have already opened a new camp for Russian prisoners of war to accommodate. Russian soldiers are encouraged to surrender. So that is the situation in Kharkiv. It's complex. There are many layers, both of the defenses and of the different narratives that are emerging. Overall, my impression is that some things worked, some things failed. And Ukraine is now rapidly responding to the changes on the battlefield. That said, Russia is also likely responding to the changes on the battlefield, because the impression I get is that the impression I get about the Russian forces involved in this is not that they're particularly capable, but that they have probably some of their better quality people there who are able to think on their feet a little bit better than, say, some of the political appointees that have been coming through. So my gut feel is don't count your chickens before they're hatched, that there are still more surprises coming from the Russian side. I also think that the Ukrainians are going to be able to hold this pretty decently, and that the overall situation will get a little bit worse, but will start improving in the next week. Of course, we're only about 4 days into this, and we should probably not be either celebrating or calling for the end of the world in either direction just yet. Now let's go to some of the more interesting, and I'll call them political information. Sergei Shoigu has been relieved of being the defense minister and has been moved over to a new position, and we'll talk about that as we go here. As Grant Shapps stated, he's overseen over 355,000 casualties among his own soldiers and mass civilian suffering. So he had to go, but he didn't exactly not land on his feet. I've got opinions, and we'll get to that in the end here. There is a new defense minister anointed or appointed, depending on how you want to look at it, Andrei Belousov. Now, this is an economist. He is not a military man. Shoigu was not a military man. So Belousov has an appointment into the Ministry of Defense. Could indicate a lot of possibilities as to why. Let's go through things and we'll kind of discuss this. This, however, could also mean that they are looking at one of two possibilities. that Belousov will be able to mobilize their entire economy to the war effort. Now, the impression I get then after that is that he's going to not have an operational command of the situation. That'll be left to lower level officers, but he will be doing kind of high level economic stuff to try and get the economy working in this direction. As Putin's spokesman stated, he was appointed to integrate the military-industrial complex into the economy. The ministry should be open to innovation and progressive ideas. Now, Belousov was previously heavily involved in their drone manufacturing side, so there's a lot of things to be said about his economic chops. I don't think there's anything to be said about his military chops. So how he performs as Ministry of Defense is going to depend greatly on the quality of the officers that serve under him, rather than him as a leader. If he's able to, if the people underneath him are actually competent, and their competence has been masked by Shoigu's incompetence, for instance, then it could be that if he gives them a freer hand, things get worse for Ukraine and better for Russia. On the other hand, if he starts trying to play in the sandbox, this could actually be much worse. It's going to depend on how quickly he can react on his feet to an ever-changing situation in the military of the Russians. Shoigu, like I said, landed on his feet. He has been appointed as Secretary of Russia's Security Council. This replaces Nikolai Patrushev, who was potentially a problem in that needed to be removed. Patrushev has had no further role that we have announced. And with Shoigu moving into that position, it could indicate one of two things there. Shoigu may be trusted, and Patrushev was not, and therefore Patrushev was removed and Shoigu put in his place. Whereas the other possibility is that Patrushev just got kicked out. This could be the first step in inviting Shoigu to enjoy a nice view out the window. But we don't know that. Of course, we don't have any direct line of thought into old Putin's head. But overall, this is still a position of power and theoretically a position of trust. Bear with me as I kind of rescan a few things here I looked at before. All right, Peskov explained Putin's decision to propose a civilian official for the post of head of the Russian Ministry of Defense by the need to introduce innovations. Basically, as somebody who is outside of the military mindset and thus the military chain, he would be able to be more creative and innovative in the things that he'd be able to bring to the Ministry of Defense. There's things to be said for this. There's also things to be said against it. There's a slate of other people that have been also appointed to new positions here. Some of them are retaining positions, etc. Just a bit of a shakeup after Vladimir Putin confirmed his 5th term in office. There is the this does explain things like the bit about Ivanov on the eve of this government here. That whole situation with him being pulled out and prosecuted was not accidental. There's a plan going on right here. There is something deliberate taking place. For instance, Anton Herashchenko states that Putin has realized that Shoigu is too toxic for him. And so he chose instead this, as he says, gray horse, Andrei Belousov. He's unknown. He's not a military man. He would not be plugged into the military structures before. And relatively speaking, he's potentially a relatively weak leader as far as the military goes. This could also mean that Vladimir Putin is going to have to take a more direct control. We did see indications that Putin was trying to show that he is an active and knowledgeable participant in the war in Ukraine and understands all the situation going on. But again, he could also have been brought in purely for his economic chops to try and bring the Russian economy into a true war footing and integrating with the Ministry of Defense. Alexandra Prokopenko states that this shows some of Putin's priorities. This means that Putin's priority is war. A war of attrition is won by economics. Belousov is in favor of stimulating demand from the budget, which means that military spending will at least not decrease, but rather increase. He has worked directly with Putin since 2008 and was the sole economist supporting Crimean annexation. This is really, again, this from an economic standpoint, this could make a lot of sense. The question is, what effect is it going to have on the Ministry of Defense itself? Patrushev was dismissed because, and then Shoigu put there, Igor Sushko theorizes that this, in fact, disarms Shoigu and made him into basically a general in name only. So, again, there's a lot of factors that we're going with here. The gut feel I'm going to come up with in the end, I think, comes closest to what Tindar states here. That why would Putin remove Shoigu, considering his infinite loyalty to his boss? And states that this promotion of sorts proves that in Russia, loyalty stands above expertise. Putin is rewarding Shoigu, who always wanted to leave the Minister of Defense post. But if Shoigu replaces Patrushev, it could be a dangerous move, as Patrushev is quite influential among the oligarchs and has been grooming his son to succeed Putin. So the idea is that possibly Patrushev will replace Medvedev, who will in turn be given a more useless position. So take your pick on which one. Is it palace intrigue? Is it politics? Is Shoigu getting promoted or demoted through this one? Everybody has their own theory. My best feel for it is that Shoigu was showing increasing levels of incompetence in the role. And regardless of that, he had to be pulled out of there. That said, that does not mean that it's going to be a demotion in the end, because it looks like he's still in a position of trust. Moving over to a strike on a restaurant in occupied Donetsk region here. There was a group of leadership that was preparing for a parade to celebrate 10 years of the 10-year anniversary of Russian occupying the Donetsk region. And it was going really well until HIMARS arrived to and introduced them to exactly how much they're disliked. There were 4 Russian army officers killed, and they've confirmed this in various ways. There were a few other people who perished as well, including some staff at the restaurant that was thus bombed. Restaurant employee and 2 visitors. That's the situation on this restaurant attack in Donetsk. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Ukraine. Not a lot of this one for today, but there's some interesting items here. This video from the UK Ministry of Defense is really interesting, kind of mentioning that the Black Sea is increasingly a no-go zone for Russia's Navy, and Ukraine's grain exports are increasing and helping to put their economy on a firmer war footing. And the amount of grain exported has is greater than at any time since the outbreak of the war. So this is helping to fund Ukraine at this point in time and keep them moving. It also indicates how much Ukraine has accomplished almost alone in stopping the situation in the Black Sea and making it so that the Russians do not have the control of the waves over there. Hi, John. Glad to see you here as well. I'm doing all right over here. We're keeping pretty busy. Ukraine claimed the downing of yet another Su-25 fighter, and this could have been another one of the situations where they're rolling some air defense systems closer to the front in hopes of catching Russian forces with their pants down. We will just be monitoring that as always. The every time they shoot one of these down, it's an expensive loss for Russia. There's the Ukrainians have had some air force moving for some time. They do occasionally lose some vehicles. They lost a couple of choppers the other day in a strike on a refueling point in the middle of a field. So they still lose some equipment. The question always remains: are they taking out far more than they're losing? We mentioned the other day the shortage of power over in Ukraine because of the constant attacks on their infrastructure. They've been getting now emergency supplies from Europe to cover some of the shortages they're having. Ukraine also reported the destruction of a Ka-52 Alligator helicopter. This was literally reported this morning. I believe the actual attack happened yesterday. Again, the Ka-52s are extremely capable attack platforms, very well suited to this war in Ukraine. To have Russia lose any of them is pretty problematic for Russia. They don't have that many of them. Ukraine, for its part, is pulling out the U.S. Playbook from the Vietnam War by pulling out some wild weasel missions. Now, if you're not familiar with those, the quick summary is that you take an airplane, you fly it over to where the air defenses can detect it for the enemy side, and when they start trying to shoot at you and paint you, you fire a anti-radiation missile, which will seek out the source of the missiles or the radar emissions and blows them up. It's a typical bait and kill type situation. So they're pulling out the old playbook and making it happen to try and get more of the Russian air defenses taken out. I don't often share these types of graphics because they're coming straight from Ukraine. I believe they're generally more accurate than most of the others, but uh, they're always said in the rosiest of terms. Still, looking at this over the last week, Ukraine has destroyed 8,730 men. That's 7 days, over 1,100 a day, either injured or killed. That's about 17 battalions. 105 tanks, 204 armored combat vehicles, 237 artillery installations, 49 rockets, and an airplane. That's in 1 week. And if they're not losing near as much as they are taking out, then this means it's going to work in their favor the longer Russia keeps trying to assault. From the Wall Street Journal, Ukraine shoots down far fewer Russian missiles than at the beginning of the war. That's because they're running out of air defense systems and missiles. They're running low on Patriot munitions, especially to intercept the ballistic missiles. Previously, over the past 6 months, it was 46% compared to 73 in the 6 months before that. And this month, the interception rate dropped to around 30%. The shortage is getting dire for Ukraine. And if they're not able to get more Patriot missiles and more air defense systems, even the Frankensams they're putting together, it's going to mean that even more of Russia's missiles are going to get through. And that's the news out of Ukraine itself. Let's go ahead and go to Russia's news. There's a lot going on here, too. A fire at a Volgograd oil refinery. That was an attack by a Ukrainian drone. Here's some videos of that very attack. Oh, got to refresh. Hang on. So you see it in the far off distance there. It was not, this was not taken close. But Baza provided a view of the flames burning merrily. So this is yet another refinery that's been damaged and in yet another attack, and that'll reduce Russia's refining capability yet again. The Defense Intelligence update from yesterday talks about Gazprom turning in its lowest revenues. We mentioned this the other day. They're even going to tax Gazprom even higher. So they've got lower revenues that have dropped below to unprofitability, and now they're going to be taxed even higher to pay for the war. So it's a rough time for Gazprom these days. Little bit of nepotism, or at least, nepotism is a good word for it. Putin proposed appointing the son of his close friend to the post of head of the accounts chamber. This is a common thing in Ukraine. These appointments are done for political reasons, not for actual. They don't pick the best people for it. Just put it simply that way. A dam in the Omsk region also broke, with hundreds of houses flooded. Started from the village of Ashavani, and they were the first to be hit. This is another sign of the continuing deterioration of Russia's infrastructure, as they have been investing not in their roads, their bridges, their dams, corruption, eliminating corruption, all of these things. Instead, they've let their infrastructure deteriorate and decay to the point where it's failing like this. This one may or may not be related to the war in Ukraine. And this is I'm adding it just because it's unusual. At the Voronezh Institute of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, 40 cadets were poisoned, with 7 requiring hospitalization. This is they felt unwell on May 9th through 10th, with abdominal pain and nausea, with 7 becoming especially ill and hospitalized. The rest were transferred to outpatient treatment, and all had signs of acute intestinal infection. Cause unknown, but we did see a bunch of poisonings happen down in Crimea with partisan women who would basically bring food and drink to susceptible Russian soldiers. Is it? Or is it just maybe a bad chili day over at their dining hall? I don't know. But I thought it was interesting. A Russian air defense base was attacked in Crimea with Storm Shadow missiles, with the commander of the base reportedly killed. There are additional wounded and other damage, but we don't have a full report on that damage yet. Okay, I've got a cat who would like to be let out of the room here, so I'm going to go ahead and just quickly put this on hold. So let's go ahead and I'll be right back. Thank you for the heads up, John. I apologize. And thank you for letting me know on that, because the cat just needed to get out and I forgot to unmute the mic. So back to it. This is from the same information from the Belgorod oil depot, but it also includes information about Lipetsk, where the Yelitskaya electrical substation, which powers the traction substation for the Russian railways, and the Stanovaya oil pumping station, and provides transit between Lipetsk, Oryol, and Bryansk energy systems. That substation was damaged with a fire. There's a lot of things going on as far as that type of thing. The Ukrainian forces hit an oil depot in Rovinke, Luhansk region. Local authorities do report dead and wounded in this attack. Quite the impressive fire that's being dealt with by the Russian forces over there. From journalist Jason J. Smart, Putin will not stop until he is stopped. The White House wasted more than 2 years fearing escalations, ignoring that Putin believes we are currently in a world war. Putin's objective is not to conquer Ukraine. It is to win the current world war. And I wanted to bring this one up because, once again, it's the exact same principle I've mentioned many times. We may not think we're at war, but our enemies are at war with us. And it's about time we noticed and did something serious about it. As Jason J. Smart continued to say that Putin believes that we are in World War III. He won by 88% in the last elections. He believes the West will cave to him. Putin has power because we allow it. That's simple. Mentioning the Crimea attack there again. There was Russian air defenses at work against incoming aerial targets in Sorokine. This was as of this morning. We do not have don't have a good amount of information on this, but I do understand that the attack struck an ammunition depot in Sorokine this morning. So there you go. They managed to get through the air defenses and attack a Russian ammunition depot in the occupied territories. Already mentioned this one. So I've got some duplicates here today. Now, this, as right before we go out of the Russian situation here, Russia's first channel is openly urging Russian servicemen not to wait for the drone, but to commit suicide themselves. The significance of life is exaggerated, according to the propagandist here, and he says that killing yourself on the battlefield is not suicide, but sacrifice. In that same vein, these are the kind of leaflets that are given to moronic soldiers of the Russian army to motivate them not to retreat. Move forward or go to jail. It's better to kill yourself than surrender to the enemy. And only thanks to God's chosen Vladimir Putin can you win. Kneel before him and kiss his feet. As Dmitry states, this is no longer an army, this is a cult, the likes of which we have not seen for a long time. Who would have thought that such a medieval approach would be possible in our era? Well, such an approach is possible when we allow it to happen instead of counter it and stop it. And that's what they're doing. They're brainwashing a cult. We're seeing much the same happening here in the U.S. Just say it. And that's the news out of Russia part there. Let's go into the international. Just a few items here. We'll quickly bip through it, get a couple other items on the front line, and then into a few other items as well. A U.S. general states that Russia will not stop with Ukraine unless they're stopped in Ukraine. Make no mistake, said Lieutenant General Stephen L. Basham of the U.S. Air Forces in Europe. No matter how this ends in Ukraine, Russia will not stop with Ukraine unless they are stopped there. This is the real situation. There's no reason to expect Russia to stop moving forward because they've made no indications that they ever will, except for false promises that they don't keep. If you remember from Beauty and the Beast, the Disney film where the Beast asks Lumiere what to do, asks Cogsworth what to do. He says to woo this girl, and he said, well, there's the usual things, flowers, chocolates, promises you don't intend to keep. Well, there's Vladimir Putin in a nutshell. According to Pavel Petrov, the Czech president, Europe must set clear boundaries for Russia. If we want to maintain security and prosperity in this part of Europe, we must set clear boundaries for Russia. And those boundaries ought to be right back at Russia's lines. German lawmakers have been suggesting that the Allies could protect sky over the western Ukraine. Some German lawmakers from both ruling party and opposition party have supported this idea, but as I understand it, Olaf Scholz has shot this down, unfortunately, in the not literal sense, meaning he has said there's no way that Germany will be doing so. However, Germany did arrange to pay for 3 HIMARS systems to be sent to Ukraine. That's $30 million worth of equipment that Germany will be paying for to ship on over. Poland is fortifying their border with Belarus due to the, quote, hybrid war. Warsaw has also for several years accused Belarus of deliberately pushing migrants into Poland in order to pressure the EU over sanctions. Lithuania stopped this particular freight car because it had the letter Z on the side that you can see right there, which is a symbol of Russian aggression and that we're all too familiar with. At the railway checkpoint in Kina, one of the wagons of the freight train entering from Belarus, border guards noticed the letter Z, which is used by the Russian military, painted in gray spray paint. And journalists have discovered the exact location of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus. This is a nuclear weapons facility 185 kilometers north of the Ukrainian border in a military warehouse near the city of Osipovichi, according to the New York Times. Some of the recently built structures there have features unique to nuclear storage facilities at bases inside Russia. For example, a new high-security area is surrounded by 3 fences in addition to the existing base-wide security perimeter. Another sign is a covered loading dock connected to an underground Soviet-era bunker. And that's kind of the international front right there. Let's go ahead and go on to the situation on the front lines. Let me do a quick refresh of this map to see if there's any updates since I looked at it yesterday. Okay, nothing new. We've got a little bit of advance by Russian forces in the Verbova area. Let me go ahead and just pull this out. This is on the south end. Yesterday, there was some wide open territory that was basically ripe for the plucking. I wouldn't call this much of an advancement. It's wide open territory. Krasnohorivka, a small advance. I mean, barely a part of a block. Netilova, again, just kind of a small feel a bit here. Simonivka, you can see this is mostly open territory. Same with up here at Solovyove. My gut feel on these changes is that Russia is basically using the opportunities presented by the Ukraine, the attack on Kharkiv, to try and push at all points in their offensive. They can't possibly have reinforced all these areas. So what they're hoping is that by widening the front, by adding this new area near Kharkiv, the overall result will be that Ukraine will be stretched too thin and unable to counter them and stop them. That's what these all feel like to me. Like, for instance, here's the Kharkiv area right here. You can see the additional areas that they've captured. Outside Volchansk, the gray zone has been widened, but the Russians haven't managed to take any additional territory beyond Hatishe. And that's kind of the front lines there. There's not, outside of what's going on in Kharkiv, there's not a lot going on. Wow, Shiminy Christmas. Let me get rid of that here. Multiple explosions heard in the Donetsk Oblast. That was as of yesterday evening. A series of explosions were heard in Pokrovsk, Donetsk Oblast, around 1 a.m. local time. And Ukraine's Air Force had previously warned of the threat of ballistic missile attacks there. This is on the Ukrainian side. This could be the Russians trying to knock out this vital logistics and command hub at Pokrovsk. No further word on the level of damages that we've seen there. On the other hand, in Rabotna, the Russians had been pushing hard back and forth, trying to take territory in the town. This, I believe, is the trench works that are just south of Rabotna. And the Ukrainians report that they have managed to retake these positions down here. Now, anytime they come in behind the Russians, you can see it's a mess behind. They do a quick tour of these trenches to show that they have recaptured them. Overall, this indicates that even though on the Verbova side, the Russians are still managing to advance, They have been pushed back in Robotna yet again. And that's the situation on the front line. So we got the Kharkiv part that was early in the video. We got the front lines here with small changes, nothing massive. And that's what my takeaway from this is that there is no major change to the front lines outside of the situation with Kharkiv, and even that in actual absolute terms is not that large. A lot of tough fighting. There are a lot of people losing their lives, a lot of tough, intense situations. And if one side or the other breaks hard, it's going to result in a lot of sudden advances. But I don't see that happening in the near future at this point. Let's go ahead and move on to other news for a few moments. And there's not a lot of it. Then I got a couple of interesting extras that I think you'll really like. Tbilisi, Georgia. This is a protesting against the law on foreign agents. And let me tell you, there are some pretty impressive commentaries on this. The parliamentary committee went ahead and passed the controversial law on transparency of foreign influence. The protests have continued quite aggressively. The security forces there have beat up detained participants in protest. They've been trying to disperse the protesters, and this has been going on for days and weeks now. Look at this video of the heart of Tbilisi here. This is the scale of the protest. This is not a Donald Trump rally in New Jersey. This is what real protest looks like. This is not some people faking a hunger strike at a U.S. college. This is when people recognize that they are about to lose everything to Russia. They don't want that. They want freedom. That is their true desire. Interesting side note here. The president of Moldova, Maya Sandu, only receives a salary of 850 euros and lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in an ordinary apartment building instead of the presidential residence. This reduces expenses for herself. Just interesting to see the vast difference here. I mean, we here in the West, we look at the U.S. president with all the pomp and circumstance and the specially protected, White House and all the security. Justin Trudeau in Canada likewise has a lot of high security and special residence. British royal family, same thing. And yet there are countries where the president of the country lives in a regular old apartment building with a regular old apartment. That's all she got. That's all she lives with because she can't afford any more. Quite the difference. Now this, I'm going to state straight up. It comes from a Trump affiliated group, not from Trump itself. It's interesting only because if this is the actual policy, it's not bad. Not bad. Unfortunately, I've seen zero indications that it's the actual policy here. So this is forwarded as the United States will seek a ceasefire in Ukraine and the start of negotiations. If Ukraine agrees, the U.S. will continue to send weapons and strengthen its defense. Ukraine's membership in NATO will be postponed. Russia could be offered sanctions relief. Ukraine will be allowed to insist on the return of all territories. Sanctions against Russia will be completely lifted only after it signs a peace agreement that is completely acceptable to Ukraine. Do I agree with this? And do I think it would work? No, I don't think it would work in the slightest. If this could happen exactly like this, it would not be bad. But I don't think Putin goes along with it. I don't think you can get peace with Russia this way. And that is the real problem. This assumes that you have a genuine desire for peace on both sides. Vladimir Putin doesn't have a desire for peace. He has a desire for conquest. He will not be satisfied until he has all of the things he wants. And what he wants is it all. So, looks good on paper. But without understanding the Russian mindset, without understanding Putin's head, this is destined to fail. Even if it went off close to this, all that means is Russia would then spend the next 4 or 5 years preparing for its next assault, its next invasion. Just saying. Now let's go ahead and move on to the interesting extras here. This one I thought was hilarious. Let me get this a little bit larger. This is entirely not war related. But if you watch this guy in the top right corner, you see he's sitting there very pensive and paying attention. All of a sudden, the monitor he had sitting right there disappears, falls off, and he quickly puts the picture back in place. Oh man, some people really need to seriously rethink this desire to try and just not just participate in your meeting, turn off your camera, or just show that you're sitting in your hammock instead of an office chair, and just pay attention to the meeting. This, by the way, we've seen so many of these up-armored sheds that have been put on tops of tanks. Well, they are not perfect, and they are certainly destroyable. Here's a destroyed one here. My understanding is that 4 in total have been destroyed. They're mostly hard to target because they do put an electronic warfare complex on top. And then, of course, the additional armor means you can't just aim your drone at it and let momentum take the effect. But they're very vulnerable to artillery strikes and probably vulnerable to having dropped munitions dropped on top of the electronic warfare complex. It may just take a little bit of extra work, but when you're going to blind yourself on 3 sides, looks like you're going to deal with the problems that are associated. This story is amazing. The video's 2.5 minutes long. I'm just going to play it in the background. There's a few bits of footage there that are fun to see. But a resident of the occupied Luhansk region who was mobilized by the Russians in February 2024 and was sent to the war in Ukraine. Now, this is a Ukrainian citizen in occupied parts of Ukraine who was effectively conscripted and then sent to the front lines. And once he gets to the front lines, he ditches his weapon, walks several kilometers while being attacked by drones and drop munitions and all this kind of stuff, gets to the Ukrainian lines and just says in Ukrainian, "Guys, I'm here." Ukrainians under Russian control don't want to be part of the Russian world. They don't want to fight for it. He literally just walked his butt across a couple of open fields because he didn't want to fight for Russia and surrendered to the Ukrainian side. Quite the impressive little bit of story. And it's part of Russia's plan. Russia wants to embrace, extend, extinguish. I've mentioned this before. There's different words for it, but they embrace a local area, they extend their control of it, then they extinguish everything about it that is unique or different than Russia, usually with the destruction of all the people there. They do that by conscripting everyone they can and sending them to the front line for yet a round of meat waves. This is how the Ukrainians are able to, I guess, show that they don't want to be part of this. They leave. They drop their weapons and they go to Ukraine. Another interesting story. Before I do this one, Richard says, I like that Russia talks about NATO. They can't even handle Ukraine. They have horrible, atrocious losses, and they didn't even go up again. Yet, can you imagine what NATO could do to Russia in just one day? The truth is, the only way Russia wins is politically, by destroying the will of the West to fight back. And they could do that with disinformation campaigns. They don't need to do that with troops. The point of the troops and the disinformation campaigns is to make the Western leadership give up. That simple. So yeah, I mean, militarily and economically, they wouldn't stand a chance. The question is, can the West unite against Russia and really invest in it? Okay, a couple more interesting stories here. A Canadian volunteer, Paul Hughes, opened a workshop in Kharkiv where more than 300 military and volunteer vehicles have been repaired in 1 year. A 59-year-old farmer and hockey coach from Calgary moved to Ukraine at the beginning of the full-scale invasion and also created the humanitarian organization HUGS, which provides food, clothing, and medicine to residents of frontline areas. On my farm in Canada, we grow food and provide it to people in need, he says. Although Mr. Hughes does not have Ukrainian roots, he has been surrounded by Ukrainians in Canada since childhood. He left Canada on March 1st, crossed the Polish border 2 days later, and has been in the country ever since. Over time, he realized that Kharkiv is a very important center for helping people in Ukraine, and Kharkiv is a place where people know how to achieve their goals. Maybe that's why Robbie's family lives there. They know how to achieve their goals. He says it's hard to be his son joined the volunteers in the Kherson region and said it's hard to be in the trenches. It's hard to be a combat medic. It's hard to be under fire. It's hard to be a person who has lost their family. They help with medical care, supervise 3 clinics in Kharkiv. This is a volunteer who came to help make a difference. I've got more than one of them today. I'm going to apologize for the pronunciation here. Kees Huizinga from the Netherlands has been working in Ukraine for 20 years and is helping the Ukrainian army. And he talks in this video about helping each other and helping out with the farming and all these things. These are people who came to Ukraine and fell in love with it, who want the best for Ukraine. They want it to be better. And so they come and they become part of Ukraine. Then there's this tearjerker of a video from Defense of Ukraine. And I'm going to just turn on the sound and let it talk.
Mom.
There's one person who will always be on your side. The road to Mom's house, her cherry tree orchard, the favorite treats she made, her gentle embrace, and her tears. War has changed many things, but not this one. A mother's love endures. Unconditional and strong, her love is a fortress. It shields from bombs, keeps warm in trenches, nurtures you when you're in pain. There's so many ways to be a mom, and so many battles. Every night they ache with worry for their sons and daughters. They pray and wait for a call or just a line of a text message, hoping to hear,
Mama, there's Joey. There's Joey.
Mother's Day may have been yesterday, but this one really touched me here. I don't even know what it would be like to be a mother of a soldier. I'm just thankful that I had an awesome mother. Still do. Thankful that I have an awesome mother who taught me right. Who taught me to fight for what's right. And to be involved and to be loving and help me to overcome my own challenges. So happy Mother's Day yesterday, and hope you spent some time with your mothers yesterday. And we're going to end off with this video that Robbie Russell sent me. This is, and I got to mute the audio because it is loud music. This is a Ukrainian soldier, and look at all those cats all over the guy. They found themselves probably the only warm spot, and all the cats decided to cuddle up with this soldier. Isn't that just fun? Isn't that just a lot of fun? And that's pretty much everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm glad to have you here. Do appreciate everything you do to help make this better. The comments, the keeping me in line and making sure I don't mute my audio for too long. Thank you again, and I hope that you have enjoyed today's video. It's tough in Ukraine right now, so make sure you keep many of the people you might know or not know in your prayers. I do hope that Ukraine is able to overcome this latest batch of challenges and is able to push the Russians back off their land. And on that note, you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.